Hi, this is Mary, your holistic recovery coach. Today, I wanted to talk to you about a recovery concept. Really, it's a saying in the addiction recovery communities based on a concept. That saying is that in referring to alcoholism and addiction, that as a disease, your disease wants you dead, but will settle for misery. Okay, so the concept is that alcoholism, addiction is a disease that wants you dead, but will settle for misery. All right, let's break that down. So, of course, um, the disease itself doesn't have thoughts and desires, but you'll find that sometimes in some of the sayings and concepts in addiction recovery, people will talk about the disease as if it's a separate entity, right? Sort of separating the alcoholic, for example, from alcoholism, the person from the disease. I think it's kind of related to that, and it helps because when talking about the disease as an entity, if you will, something separate from oneself that has its own characteristics and qualities to it, sometimes helps to better understand the nature of the disease. Okay, so now that we cleared that part up, that your disease doesn't really have a mind of its own, but if it did, the saying goes that your disease wants you dead, but will settle for misery. So the once you dead part, and I will do a separate video on this because I realized that I haven't, on the concept of that addiction is progressive and fatal. Okay, alcoholism and drug addiction is progressive. It's a progressive illness, meaning it gets worse over time, and fatal, meaning it does ultimately end in death, premature death. Now, this saying, however, about it's a disease that wants you dead but will settle for misery certainly applies in many cases, because I'm sure we all know someone in our life or have known someone who struggles with addiction, or you might not even use the word struggle, but it's obvious that they have an active addiction, okay, alcoholism, some other drug that they're addicted to, and it has not killed them. And um, and perhaps they're otherwise healthy or seemingly healthy or somehow resilient in spite of their their physical addiction. Yet, so it has not killed them yet. However, you probably realize that they're not as happy as they could be, right? So addiction being an illness that will settle for misery is really about the fact that, listen, if you're trying to come to terms with the fact that you may be an alcoholic, you may be an addict, you could easily say, well, it hasn't killed me. I haven't had near-death experiences with it. I haven't almost, died in a car crash or ended up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning or, had ODs, things like that. Well, that's great. Good for you. However, chances are you are not as happy as you could be. If you're in an addictive process, if you're in an active addiction, then we know that you are not living up to your potential. That's one way to put it. But also, your chances are you're stuck in a state in which you are not as happy as you could be, right? So what is misery? I think the definition of misery is something like being wretchedly unhappy, or being in a state of unhappiness for a period of time. So a disease that will settle for misery, for long-term misery, basically lifelong misery, if you never get the gift of recovery. So if you stay actively addicted, chances are you're going to be relatively unhappy for the rest of your life. Now that sounds very dark and grim. And of course, misery is subjective, right? Just like happiness is subjective. But if you're in an addictive cycle, in an addictive pattern and stuck in your addiction, then you are not as happy as you could be. And chances are you are pretty miserable, right? There might be days when you feel good. There might be aspects of your life that you feel good about. But at the heart of your illness, if it's active and untreated in any regard, then you're going to be unhappy. And basically, it's the idea that settling for misery for the rest of your life. Now we use that saying and it sounds like we're talking about, again, like the disease having a thought or a feeling, but really it's about Are you willing to settle for misery for the rest of your life? Because if you continue to ignore or avoid or just deny the addiction that you're dealing with, the addiction is not going to go away by itself, and it will, so to speak, settle for you to be miserable for the rest of your life if it doesn't kill you first. So that being sort of a dark topic, but reality, we need these doses of reality because, again, when you're dealing with addiction, a primary symptom and characteristic of addiction is denial. What keeps an addict, an alcoholic, continuing to use their drug of choice and justify it and, stay addicted to it? The majority of the time, the primary process at play mentally is denial. I'm not that bad. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not an addict. I can stop whenever I want. I haven't lost X, Y, or Z. These certain consequences haven't happened to me. All those types of things that play into denial, which is basically about not knowing that you're lying to yourself. So again, with breaking the cycle of the perpetual state of misery, whether it's day in, day out, or in cycles, it's all a matter of starting with getting honest. And if you are considering that you may have this illness, and it is an illness, it is a disease called alcoholism or drug addiction, or maybe some other type of addiction that has not yet killed you, but you recognize that perhaps when you really are honest with yourself, you are not as happy as you could be. The good news is that recovery is possible, right? That there is light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to ask for help. You need to connect to some type of recovery path. And that usually starts with getting honest with yourself, getting honest with someone else, and asking for help. And then choosing some type of path to start working, some type of recovery program to start working. And there are many paths to recovery. So you do not need to remain miserable. If today is your first day choosing to walk the path of recovery from your addiction, then congratulations, you never have to feel that miserable again, the misery caused by active alcoholism, active addiction. So I will be sure to put some resources in the description below the video. And if there are other recovery concepts that you'd like to hear me talk about, please comment below or send me a message. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.